Ukraine needs a miracle to drive Russian military out of Kherson. At the end of July, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine issued a sharp warning to Russian troops in the Kherson region. The Ukrainian Armed Forces, UAF, the statement said, are preparing for a massive counteroffensive, saying the Russians in Kherson have a choice: retreat or be destroyed. However, like many other Ukrainian claims in the south, this threat has yet to be realized. Studying the geography and comparing the forces involved, however, reveals the reality that it was only by a miracle that Ukraine could push Russia out of Kherson. In fact, Kiev would need closer to the Three Wonders to launch an effective offensive there. On March 2nd, just days after the start of the war, Russia captured Kherson in southern Ukraine, making it the first major city to fall. Putin's troops have held him ever since. Almost immediately, Ukraine announced its intention to return the city. Over the past few months, various Ukrainian officials have claimed that the Ukrainian armed forces are either about to launch a counteroffensive to recapture the city or have already launched one. Here are just a few of the many headlines published in Western and Ukrainian media. On May 29, the New York Times stated, "The battle for Ukraine widens as Kiev launches a counteroffensive." On June 9, U.S. News reported, Ukraine retakes part of territory in counteroffensive in Kherson region. On June 29, The Washington Post adds, near Kherson, Ukrainians reclaim territory in major counteroffensive. July 3, The Economist points out, Ukraine is preparing a counteroffensive to retake the Kherson region. July 28, Fox News headline, Kherson cut off. Ukrainian counteroffensive gains momentum in southern city. On August 5, the Ukrainian media claim, the Ukrainian army begins an offensive in the Kherson region, ukrinform.net. What is immediately clear when observing these headlines in the context of the Times is that apart from the written statements, the front lines dividing the two sides fluctuated a little more than a few miles in either direction. That is, in fact, to date, the offensive was nothing more than ink. As I have detailed throughout these pages, there are fundamental military reasons why Ukraine is unlikely to launch a successful counteroffensive in the foreseeable future. However, there are even more reasons to doubt the wisdom of Ukraine's attempt to counteroffensive in the Kherson region. Many Western analysts have suggested that this summer marks a critical period for Ukraine's war effort, and the announced offensive in Kherson could be a game-changer for Kiev. If these are stakes, then Zelensky should drop the idea now, before an even bigger catastrophe occurs. The reason: to carry out a successful military offensive, Ukraine would need to produce 3 successive military miracles. Spoiler alert, the chances of achieving even one miracle are unlikely in a pinch. There is no rational chance for 3. To demonstrate why this offensive has so little chance of success, we'll do a mental exercise to illustrate the difficult levels of difficulty. For the purposes of everything that follows, let's say for now that somehow Ukraine was able to overcome all the obstacles that I voiced in my previous work that would be necessary even to start an operation, mobilizing enough manpower, tanks, aircraft, ammunition, and other supplies needed to sustain the fighting. Launching the offensive will be only the first of several monumental tasks. Miracle no. 1. Russia does not make adjustments to the offensive. One of the mistakes that many analysts make when assessing Ukraine's chances of a successful return of Kherson is the usually unspoken assumption that the current momentum will continue throughout the operation. For example, recently Ukraine has had some success in interdicting Russian ammunition depots and damaging bridges across the Dnieper River with HIMARS rocket launchers. The hope is that Ukraine can block Russia's ability to resupply its forces on the western side of the Dnieper by isolating the defenders. In addition, there is an implicit assumption that the number of troops allocated by Russia for the Kherson mission will remain unchanged, even if Ukraine begins to achieve success. This is almost certainly not the case. Putin knows how big a blow his war will be if his troops lose Kherson. So far, Putin has avoided the political risk of putting his country on a fully mobilized footing, preferring to keep life as normal as possible for the majority of Russia's population. But if his choice is to take a political risk with his population or lose a major battle, it is a virtual certainty that Putin will order mobilization and bring in as many troops as necessary to prevent the loss of Kherson. It should be kept in mind that Russia has significant resources that it could use that Putin has not yet activated. Russia still has millions of military-age men. Its military industry is still fully operational, although it has dwindled due to sanctions, many hundreds of thousands of active duty troops, and thousands of armored vehicles of all types in stock, although many of them are old variants. If Ukraine started to win the war, Putin could activate a huge amount of material and human resources. Ukraine practically does not have such capacities. Miracle number 2, geography doesn't matter. If somehow Ukraine overcame all the obstacles needed to launch an offensive and then performed miracle number 1 that Russia did not reinforce their defenders, they would still have to overcome 2 major geography challenges. First, the UAF troops are currently in prepared defensive positions in the vicinity of Nikolaev, about 30 miles west of Kherson. They have the protection provided by some urban area in that city, dugouts built into the ground, trenches, and the advantage of top cover in forests nearby. In order for the Ukrainian forces to attack Kherson, they would have to leave the advantages inherent in defense and cross almost 20 miles of open steppe. Russian gunners and drone operators will observe and be able to engage armored vehicles and infantrymen in the open, with limited protection. Russia still has a significant amount of artillery in the Kherson region, the ability to launch missile strikes, and still has a large air force advantage. Ukraine risks being cut into ribbons if they venture out into the streets. The Russians, meanwhile, will retain full defensive advantage, where they are reportedly building significant defenses in Kherson and the region from which they could withstand a lot of bombardment, delivering artillery strikes with near impunity. Secondly, this is the Dnieper River. While a lot of media attention has been given to the success of the Ukrainian gunners in damaging several key bridges needed to supply the Russian defenders, less has been done to indicate that those same bridges would be needed for an offensive to advance 1 meter per limits of Kherson. If Ukraine overcame all obstacles and successfully pushed Russia out of Kherson, it would still have to cross the Dnieper to push Russia out of the region. If Putin's troops were expelled from Kherson, they would certainly destroy the bridges in their path, unless Ukraine drops the bridges first. Russian artillery and rocket launchers further east of the Dnieper, along with other mobile armored forces in the area, will have no problem preventing Ukrainian engineers from crossing the river. Without these bridges, Ukraine's advance won't get far beyond the 15 miles they would need to attack to get to the river. Miracle number 3, Ukraine is able to successfully push Russian troops out of urban areas with fewer troops, artillery, and aircraft than the defenders. One of the enduring demands of attack since the First World War has been the need for the attacking force to have superior numbers of troops, armor, artillery, and aircraft. If Ukraine were to get the first 2 miracles, that Russia did not respond to a Ukrainian attack and that geographic restrictions were relaxed, it would still have to find a way to do something that has probably never happened in a century of modern warfare: an attacking force defeating a defending force. No advantage in the number of troops, artillery, or aviation. The Germans, through their own bitter experience, cannot win a tank battle without aircraft in their defeat by the Soviet Army in the Battle of Kursk. Artillery was almost decisive for the victors in World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, and has a huge impact on the 2022 Russo-Ukrainian War. Historically, it has been nearly impossible for an attacking force to defeat a defending force if the attackers are inferior in field artillery. It would be a miracle if Ukraine defeated the Russians in Kherson without a clear superiority in aviation and field artillery. Reality of Harish. Every important historical factor that defines the battlefield indicates that Ukraine will fail if it tries to launch an offensive against Russia in Kherson. It is true that in wartime there is no such thing as never. There is no certainty in a slam dunk, no guarantees. It is theoretically possible that Ukraine could overcome all obstacles and still defeat Russia. But it's also true that miracles on the battlefield are rare and vastly outweighed by instances where predictable, quantifiable military indicators foreshadow the outcome. Realistically speaking, Ukraine is about as close to failing to successfully launch an offensive in Kherson as one can imagine. As this analysis shows, Ukraine will need not just one miracle to succeed, they will need three. Betting on the integrity and safety of a country going 3 for 3 in the wonders department might not be the best course to take. While it is understandable that Ukraine would be reluctant to make any kind of deal with Russia that would almost certainly result in the cession of some percentage of its territory, this may ultimately be the least bad option for the potential to continue the fight, overcome the odds in the hope of an outright victory later and possibly lose everything. Only the people and the political leadership in Kiev can make that call, but the evidence strongly suggests that making the best deal possible, even with a hated Putin, may be the wiser strategy.